the police. I want to thank you again for making yourselves available for this media availability. What this is related to is the release of an independent research report on patrol staffing that was commissioned and funded by the Greater Austin Crime Commission. I think it's important for me to talk about this today and to kind of let the community know the type of things that the Crime Commission has been working on that are going to, in the end, I think, be beneficial to the police department. There's certainly been much discussion related to staffing with our police department. And for some time, the Austin Police Department has been awaiting the finalization of a staffing model that was designed using 5 years of APD call data to determine appropriate patrol staffing levels. There are many considerations for APD on staffing. And I want to be clear, this model will be one of several tools that we use to help us achieve the right balance for the department and the community. This effort is so incredibly important at this moment. We cannot lose sight of the most important task that we have as a public safety department, and that's keeping our community safe, keeping citizens free from harm, and feeling a deep sense of security in their everyday lives so that they not only are safe, but importantly, that they feel safe. Creating and fostering relationships with all segments of our community so that everyone has a voice and everyone feels heard is so important. As I've taken over as chief of police, I felt it was so critical to have a reset between our department and the community. I've been working to implement new practices and policies that strengthen that effort, increasing transparency and providing for greater communication and collaboration with our community. In that spirit, I'd like to thank the Greater Austin Crime Commission. We have the president, Corby Jastro, is on the call today and will be available following my comments for any questions that there may be for the GACC, as well as Dr. Jonathan Kringen, who is APD's Chief Data Officer and was important for this effort as he was the person who facilitated the data over for the research project to be conducted. The Greater Austin Crime Commission commissioned the study in May of 2021 to create an evidence-based, data-driven model that would look at several different factors to scientifically tell us how many officers we need to accomplish our public safety priorities. The research report recommendations that were released today focus on a staffing model that pertains only to patrol. Now, I have long stated that the most important function that our police department does is answering 911 calls. And that's the reason the researchers started with patrol in this effort. A second part of the staffing model will be completed later this year to look at non-patrol functions, including specialized units, investigative units, and administrative units. The research, which was conducted by two academic researchers, Dr. Giovanni Circo from the University of New Haven, Connecticut, and Dr. Sean Patrick Roche from Texas State University, has two distinct components. The first is a machine learning analysis to discover the relationship between staffing levels and call for service response times, as well as the relationship between call for service response times and public safety outcomes. The second part was a large-scale survey of Austin residents to discover community perceptions about which police services need to be prioritized. The final analysis indicated that a response time of 6 minutes and 30 seconds was desired for the most urgent police calls to increase the likelihood of arresting a suspect and recovering a firearm. The machine learning and survey analysis data were applied to staffing models to determine appropriate staffing levels for the patrol function here at APD. The current authorized strength on patrol for APD is 774 officers. The modeling recommended increasing the number of authorized patrol positions to 882, or 108 more officers than is currently allocated. With average vacancy rates, that would maintain approximately 730 working officers at any given time, and with a 95% degree of certainty would allow the police department to maintain a 6-minute and 30-second average response time. Now, I know that's a lot of information, and really I just refer you to the full report for the details. I've stated that I thought it was important to put forward a staffing recommendation that was evidence-based and data-driven. And I intend to use this as one of several tools to inform my staff planning. As part of my process, I will be meeting with City Council offices to share how this information might be used and to gain their feedback. I also intend to meet with community advocates to gain their feedback as well. In the following weeks after getting that feedback from council and the community, I will present detailed plans to the city manager and to mayor and council, detailing how these recommendations may be implemented in a sensible manner that fits within our city budget and responds to keeping our community safe. This is a major step forward towards accomplishing these goals. Creating additional sworn officer positions to quickly answer emergency calls, but also to be present and visible in our neighborhoods and to have time to engage in the very important activity of community policing. As I mentioned earlier, this staffing model only applies to patrol, and a second part of the model will be released later this year, which outlines the right sizing of non-patrol units. With the growing number of crimes, including gun violence, and involving gun violence, as well as the growing number of traffic fatalities we experienced last year in Austin, it's critical that we have the right number of people in both areas. I will be working on these type of evidence-based efforts to put forward sensible plans that work to keep Austin citizens safe. I'll go ahead and take a few questions, and as I said, I also have Dr. Jonathan Kringen and Corby Jastro from the Greater Austin Crime Commission online, if there are any questions for either one of them.
Chief, thank you so much for those remarks. For those of you, for our media partners who have questions, I invite you to go ahead and use the raise hand function to indicate that you have a question, and we'll call on you. If all else fails and you cannot find the raise hand function, I invite you to also drop your question in the chat. And bear with me one second. First question, Audrey McGlinchey.
Chief, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, Audrey.
Okay. So I wanted to better understand, you said you're going to take these numbers to city council. Are you going to be asking for, I mean, budget season isn't until obviously the summer. What exactly will you be asking for?
Well, I think it's important, first of all, that I have an opportunity to fully understand the plan. The model has just been released today by the Greater Austin Crime Commission, and it is a pretty long report. It's very technical. It's actually a scientific model, so being able to understand how it works so that I can better explain that. And luckily I have Dr. Jonathan Kringen, who is kind of an expert in this field, to be able to help me to do that is going to be very important. I think that I have to be able to explain it to council and to the city manager's office so that they can understand it. Explain it to our community and our community advocacy groups that are going to have an interest in this, and be able to get the feedback from them. Again, this is just really one tool of many that we use, but it's a very, very important tool. It's one that I think really informs and tells me with a high degree of certainty exactly how many officers I need to be able to achieve the metrics that we're trying to achieve. So I know that is a tough way of really answering your question, but I think it's important to understand that just because the report says 108 officers does not necessarily mean that's what I'm going to take forward. Is one tool of many that I'm going to use to determine appropriate staffing levels.
Thank you, Audrey and Chief. Next question goes to Austin Sanders.
Hey, Chief, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I guess I'm wondering, you have vacant officer positions now that you've been unable to fill. So, if the result of this study and other tools is increased funding for new patrol officers, how do you actually fill them? What other strategies can you do to improve recruiting, retention, beyond just having the funding for new officers?
Yeah, that's a great point, Austin. I'm glad that you're pointing it out so we can talk about it a little bit because, what we're trying to do is to right size our department and determine how many officers do I need so that we have the very best public safety outcomes that really makes sense. But at the same time, we have to increase our training capacity. That means how many classes that I can put on and how many officers I can have or cadets that I can have in those classes. And then I have to reduce the level of attrition that I have right now in the department. And that really means that we have fewer officers that are retiring, resigning, kind of staying on, increasing the ranks. So we're going to be working in those areas as well as what you mentioned, recruiting. It's important that we recruit the right type of folks to be police officers in our community. We have a very robust and diverse recruiting unit that is working on doing that very thing for future classes. So it's kind of a multi-pronged effort. This is just one of the things that I think it's important to talk about so that people understand, how we're coming to the numbers that we're coming to when we're asking for staffing levels, but it's only one part of the solution.
Austin, thank you. Next question goes to Brad Johnson.
Chief, thanks for taking my question. One thing on the figures. So you mentioned the goal is 6 minutes and 30-second response time. Do we know where we're starting at now, like what the average response time is at the moment? And then the other part of it is, you said current authorized patrol is 774. What's the current patrol level itself, rather than just authorized?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to answer the second part of your question first. So we are not at 774. That's our current authorized strength. The actual number fluctuates almost on a daily basis. If we have officers, for instance, that are out on COVID quarantine, or we have them out on, long-term leave from military, or other reasons that officers tend to be out. They come back from those kind of things on a regular basis, so it fluctuates on a regular basis. I can tell you that we're well below the 774, and I don't have the exact number as of today of where we're at, but we are not at 774. The first part of your question, I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Kringen to go ahead and talk a little bit about that.
Right. So as far as response time goes, what we've seen over the past few years is our metrics moving up and up. And so we have been running in the 8-minute range with priority 0 calls, which the recommendation is 6.5. And we've been running longer still as we've experienced our staffing levels on patrol. So the 2016 was a period in time when we were much closer to that 6.5-minute mark on average. And so one of the things about it that's important is it's kind of a feasibility weighted metric. And so these aren't response times that we can't get to. They're response times that we have been able to do at other points in time where, frankly, the size of Austin was a little bit different and the staffing levels were a little bit different. So we are looking to drop those down substantially. And this particular shift in number of officers is going to do that.
And it looks like we have a follow-up from Brad. So Brad, feel free to unmute and come into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Just one follow-up. So there's been a lot of talk about a large amount of attrition at the end of this month when the buy forward policy changes. Do you still think that's going to happen? The number I've heard was 100 to 200. officers up and leaving basically at once. What's the status of that?
Generally our officers are notifying us, well ahead of time when they intend to retire. And in this case, that would be a retirement, a buy forward. We have not received those kind of numbers, anywhere near those kind of numbers. For the month of January, I currently have 17 officers that are departing for one reason or another. And that is what we're anticipating right now, holding steady at that. And overall, as we've looked back over the last year and a little bit longer, our average attrition rate per month has been closer to 13 to 15 per month, and that has held steady. So, obviously during that time, the tough part is that we have not had any new officers coming into the department as we took a pause on our cadet classes. And I'm glad to report that we will be graduating a cadet class at the end of this month. So that will help to start refilling the ranks. That's what we need for the future. But we have not seen the kind of numbers that you're talking about with people saying they were going to leave.
Thank you, Chief. It looks like we have gone through our initial round of questions. A reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please go ahead and use the raise hand function so that you can be acknowledged to come into the conversation. If you're having trouble finding that, please go ahead and drop your question in the chat. In the meantime, it looks like we have another question from Austin Sanders. Austin, please feel free to unmute. Austin, we're having trouble hearing you. Austin, I'm going to put you back on mute for a quick second. And I'll go to another question. Ben Thompson.
Hey, Chief. So quick question just about kind of the timeline of this study. You'd mentioned kind of the time and the work that has gone into producing this, and the next steps are going to be some engagement on it. But is this something that you're planning is going to be repeatable down the road? Is this something you're going to look at kind of on an annual basis, or is this kind of a one-off thing to just kind of reset how the department is looking at these statistics?
No, that's a great thing about this model, is that it can be used continually over time. We can change as we change the metrics. Let's say that we determine that the 6.5 minute mark needs to change. As we adjust that, the model will be able to tell us, even as the changing size of the city and based on the number of calls that we have coming in, it's going to be able to adapt that information and continue to tell me, hey, here's the number of officers that you need to be able to achieve that metric. So this is not a one and done. This is something that we will be using over time. It is a really great tool for us and will help to inform what's the right staffing level. Right now, we're just looking at patrol, but later this year, I hope to have a fully implemented model that'll tell me how many officers I need on the department overall.
Thank you, Chief. We're going to try Austin Sanders for his follow-up question one more time. So I'm going to unmute. Austin?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, Chief, I wasn't clear on your answer to Audrey when she asked about how you intend to use this data. Is this something that you want to ask council for, like a mid-year budget amendment to increase patrol staffing, or are you intending to kind of collect more data and use this for the budget process in the next fiscal year?
I don't think that I've made that determination yet. I want to, obviously, I don't want to say that I'm going to come in for a mid-year budget adjustment right now, having just received the final report.
Austin, I'm going to put you back on mute.
Sorry, I had to mute him there because I was getting feedback. So until I've had an opportunity to not only digest all of the report, but also be able to brief it out to all of the affected parties and kind of work it in, like I said, to our overall staffing process so that we're making kind of some good very informed but common sense decisions around staffing that are going to make sense for our community and make sense for the department. So to answer the question, really haven't made that determination yet, and I hope to within the next really several weeks.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left remaining, 5 minutes left remaining in this media availability. Want to see if there are any final questions before we turn it back over to Chief for any final remarks you'd like to make. We're just going to give it a moment to allow people the opportunity to find their raise hand. And Ben, you had a follow-up.
So two quick things here. First one was just, I was wondering, where is this study available to view right now? And then secondly, this kind of thing isn't something I'm super familiar with, and you'd mentioned kind of how complex this is, but I was wondering if you or one of the other participants might be able to speak a little bit to just go a little more in depth into kind of how the numbers were crunched, like what the process behind the scenes looked like for this.
Yeah, we're going to need longer than 5 minutes, Ben, to be able to do that. You know, it's pretty complex. So to the first part of your, yes, we are going to be sending the full report out following this media availability for all of our media partners to be able to review it. And what I'm going to do is bring Dr. Kringen back on very briefly to just give a couple minutes of what this is and help explain it for the common person who's hearing this.
Yeah, great. It's a really good question. What you have here in the study and the machine learning component of it is it's a machine learning algorithm that took 5 years of data, measured every possible relationship within the data, and then parsed through it to find which relationships actually are predictive of response time. Now, one of those data points that's important in that is the staffing level. While the ultimate goal was to figure out how staffing level relates to response times, there was a secondary goal that had to drive that, which was what response times should we be trying to get to? So we measured across 6 million officer responses, and the machine learning looked at various factors of those things, what type of call for service it was, where did it happen, when did it happen, and parsed from that the conclusion that we see these public safety gains at 6.5 minutes or better. And so first it established that threshold. Now, using that threshold, the model parsed through all available relationships in the data to figure out what the unique contribution of staffing is to those response times. And that's how you actually build out a model that'll give you a predictive capacity. Thinking about questions about the modeling and whatnot, what I can share with you is that the developer of the model, Dr. Serco, is submitting the modeling for peer review for publication in a scientific journal. And just for context, Dr. Serco recently won the National Institute for Justice contest for using machine learning algorithms to predict recidivism among released individuals. So national competition that he just won. So very skilled researcher in that area. And we have a lot of faith in the work.
Thank you, Dr. Kringen. And it looks like we have time, just about enough time for one more question, and that goes to Dylan Scott. Dylan, feel free to unmute.
Hi, Chief. Just a quick question here. I was wondering if you had any information on whether other cities had tried similar models and what kind of success maybe they had with, a similar type of model. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. That's a great question and was actually going to be part of my closing comments. So I'll go ahead and talk about it now. To my knowledge, no other city in the U.S. is doing something like this. No one to this level of specificity using this type of science to determine staffing levels has put together a model like this. So it is pretty groundbreaking. I'm just having a little bit of understanding of exactly what it is. I'm very excited about it to be able to use a tool that is really evidence-based and data-driven. We pride ourselves as a police department in using data and evidence to make decisions, especially policy decisions that are going to make sense for our community. So this falls right in line with that, and is going to be, I think, a very useful tool for our department, and something that has that evidence behind it when we talk about, this is the right number of officers that we need to be able to accomplish our goals. It can tell us with a high degree of certainty exactly how many we need to be able to do it. And I think that was the last question, correct, Alicia?
You were correct until Austin Sanders slid in just under the wire with one more question. Austin, go for it. Austin? Looks like Austin may be having some trouble. Austin, if you'd like, you can go ahead and either drop your question in the chat, or feel free to email us your question, and we'll get your question answered as quickly as possible. And with that, Chief, I'm going to let you wrap things up with your final remarks.
All right. Thank you, Alicia. Thanks to all of our media partners for joining today. This is a really just a groundbreaking effort. It's something that has been months in the making, and I'm very excited to be able to understand it myself, that we as a department can use this as a tool. We can share it with our community. We can share it with city leadership so that they understand it. And then we make informed decisions about the right size of our police department moving forward. I think that it highly prioritizes what is a very important aspect of public safety, which is keeping the community safe. And that has, to a large degree, in my opinion, has been lost in the conversations that we've had. We need to kind of bring that back to the front, as we have been dealing with gun violence, as we've been dealing with traffic deaths, and making sure that we have the right number of law enforcement officers that are performing those functions. And then also looking at how can we do those things that don't necessarily need to have a sworn police officer have some other function take care of those kind of tasks. Thank you once again to the Greater Austin Crime Commission. They were instrumental, obviously, in putting all of this together. We certainly, Corby and Carrie and everyone at the Crime Commission, thank you for putting this together and providing a very, very valuable tool for the department. Thank you to Dr. Jonathan Kringen. And thanks once again to all of our partners on the call today. Y'all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Chief. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.